What is up, everybody? Happy Wednesday. This is your host, Adam Mason, with the Beer to Talk podcast. Super excited for you guys to be listening to this one. We have one of my heroes on, Ryan Longnecker, who is just an incredible guy. But before we get into Ryan's episode, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping now that we're back in the flow. One, I just want to say I appreciate you. It takes a lot of work to do a podcast. We're almost up to 100 episodes now, and it's been ad-free every single episode. It's only funded by mentorship and Patreon, and it just means so much to me when you guys reach out and book mentorship sessions, or your long-term mentee. Obviously those guys are super huge for this podcast. It's been amazing, and I'm just so thankful for you. I want to give a shout out to the mentees and the people in the mentorship program. You guys are awesome. Also, the people on Patreon, we're having a good relationship there. We're sharing some crazy stuff in there that are just kind of like nitty gritty that maybe won't be a full episode, or maybe it doesn't warrant a full session. But you get to kind of see under the hood of what's going on in photography, what's going on in business. And it's just so much fun. Like, I never thought it would be so much fun to talk about tax planning or SEO or just the nitty gritty of Instagram. I've never thought that it would be so much fun, and it has been. So thank you so much. Continue to do that. I appreciate it a lot. It really helps the show. Obviously, leaving a review on iTunes always helps the show, and we really, really love it. So I want to get into our guest, Ryan Longnecker. He is an amazing guy. I've been following him forever. He's a commercial travel and landscape photographer outside of California, and his work is just baller. And so even though I was in Toronto traveling for this episode for a big corporate client, I brought all my podcast gear into another country, and we chatted for a long time. And this is a mix of kind of hearing his transition. He did wedding photography for 8 years, and I didn't even know. Like, that's how long he's been in the game, and his work has just been so good. So we talk about that. One word to note, he is an outdoor photographer, and I love that he recorded his session outside. So you might hear a few bird chirps or dog barks, and I think it's just kind of cool. I think there's no better way to compliment his episode than to have a little noise. So without any further ado, here is Ryan Longnecker. Ryan, so thank you so much for being on. I have to ask this question, and I don't know if you're going to be offended and you're just going to shut this off right now. How long, because your last name is Longnecker, how long is your neck, and is it longer than other photographers?
Well, that's a well-hidden secret. I keep it behind the beard so that it's just this question that I want people asking, so I can't give you the answer, but I definitely appreciate it.
I always try and mess with the guests and ask like an icebreaker question, and obviously we chatted before, and it's pretty laid back anyway, and we're both like two bearded dudes wearing fitted hats, and so we're like, oh, we've got that in common. But I was like, I wonder if he gets this weird ass question. I have one other one. Do you have a bad sushi story? Like, have you ever gotten sick from bad sushi, or you're just like, hey, I want to try it, or what's your favorite sushi roll?
Okay, my favorite sushi. Well, there's a couple of good places. There's a couple of good places in Orange County because I live in Long Beach, but there's a couple of good places nearby. I used to live in Reno, Nevada, though, and Reno, strangely, is pretty well known for their sushi game. My favorite roll, though, I don't have a specific favorite roll. I have a favorite kind of roll. I like it. I like the deep fried. I like it when it's got crab meat and spicy tuna. I also like fatty yellowtail just on its own.
Okay.
It's really good. But a bad sushi story. I've never had sushi that got me sick because it was just bad quality. I've eaten sushi so much to where I left there being sick because I just don't have self-control when it comes to sushi, and it becomes this thing of I used to get an all you can eat kind of plate where you just keep ordering rolls and rolls, and it was like $20 for all you can eat. It was insane. That was up in Reno. So I'd order that, and then the deal was that you had to eat it all or you had to pay for what was left on your plate. So it's pretty
Mm.
pretty crafty because people usually order too much and then they have to pay for what's left on their plate. That's not what I would do. I would just make it happen. And then when the rice was expanding, I'd be walking out to the car in pain. So, yeah, so I don't think I have a really bad tuna story, but I don't want to get people into that was a Subway tuna anyway. So it was like, so
Oh
that,
my gosh.
that's not something anyone wants to hear, but sushi, yeah,
That's awesome.
I'm a big fan. I'll eat pretty much anything. I had a jalapeno spicy roll. It was like at this, um, it was a fusion sushi place up in Santa Monica that was really good. But it was the first time I had ever had something like that. So they had all these like weird rolls, but I'll eat anything. I'm kind of that way. But I'd
That's
love to
awesome.
just
I
talk about
remember I was
sushi
just
for
like,
the next hour if
yeah, totally. That'll be a side podcast for anybody. But I feel like, yeah, you're out in Orange County, so like, there's lots of good food operations, different things like that that are going to be good for you. But I was always curious. I was like, yeah, like sushi's one of those still like risky foods. So it's like you never know.
totally.
So dude, I've been a fan of you. I was thinking about this today, and I was like, how long have I been following Ryan Longnecker and seeing what's up? And I realized I'm pretty sure I've been following you. One, this is like the funny way is before presets were
Uh-huh.
cool, or before selling presets were cool. Um, and then two, I'm pretty sure when I first started following you on Instagram, it was still only square images.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that's how
okay.
long. Yeah, so either like 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
maybe 4 years,
Okay.
maybe.
Cool.
Yeah. So your work is just awesome, and I feel like there's nobody else even now where I feel like it's very easy for a cool landscape photographer who's really good to like get up in Instagram following and be successful. Your work is still like I've had a hard time trying to find somebody that looks like your work, which is awesome,
Hmm.
right? Like in Instagram space, because I feel like a lot of people, it's like, oh yeah, these guys have like similar feel, or like you think of like I love Iceland, but I feel like every famous Iceland photographer now is like, oh, here's my dark and moody, look of
Totally.
Iceland, and you're like, oh, that's cool, but all of you guys look the same, and your work still like, I was thinking about it the other day, like it looks like cotton candy, even if cotton candy came in different
Yeah.
colors. Like it's not just blue and pink; it's like my oranges are bright, everything. So, it's just so beautiful, and I think it's. I always want to bring people on that do something unique. So, I wanted to like, what's your story? Have you always been from California? I know that you used to. I saw something on your site or on Instagram where you used to live in either Bishop or
Yeah.
Bishopville, and it was just magical looking.
Yeah.
So, how'd you get your start? What's your vibe, and what are you kind of doing for work nowadays?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Bishop, which is this small mountain town in California. And a lot of people, I mean, if you're a rock climber or if you like the mountains, I mean, it it makes me laugh because I grew up about an hour north of Alabama Hills, which now because of Instagram is like this very popular place, but it's literally the desert. And I grew up of that just being like, oh, that's out there in the sticks. Like that's not a really cool place before Instagram. I mean, it has a history of being in films and all of these other things. But anyway, I grew up in Bishop. And so that's, I think, even before I was a photographer, that just really developed my appreciation of the outdoors just because there's not a lot else you can do. So I was into bouldering and I was into fishing and hiking and all of the kind of free activities that would take place. Like I knew a ton of people that were skiers and snowboarders, and I know people that have gone pro in that because Mammoth Mountain was so close, but I was more into just kind of the free appreciation of things. And so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I started there and then I moved, down to Orange County for college. I was actually pursuing music. And I did that for 6 years. And then right when I graduated with my degree in music, I actually went into the wedding photography business and did that for 8 years. And it was great, but at the same time, it was a lot of the reason I got into it was because I I picked up a job being the yearbook photographer for my college my senior year, and so doing that for a year, just having a camera around my neck all the time and having a pretty good, at the time, it was a really good quality camera. So I didn't realize what cameras could even do. And so I would spend a ton of my extra time just taking long exposures at the ocean. And it was a great thing to sort of get me back in touch with being out in nature again, because you have to be really intentional about that when you move into a place like Orange County. Like it won't be handed to you. It's like you have to go seek it out. And so I think having that camera got me out there. And so it connected me just both on kind of in the artistic brain, but also in my appreciation for the outdoors again, that I didn't have when I was pursuing music, which was a very indoor activity. So, so yeah, I think that just doing that, and then after doing the wedding photography thing for 8 years, it was like I found myself less and less able to be like to put on the like face of pretending that people's canvas wrapped mason jars were cool anymore. Like I just got to the point where I was like, I think what people deserve is a photographer who's going to provide value of like bringing the energy up and being happy and all that. And I was just like, man, I'm not really able to do that anymore like I used to be able to, because my passions are over here. And so I just pursued that and did outdoor stuff, and you'd be hard pressed to find any of my like wedding photography work, because I wiped it as much as I could from the internet world. But so now I'm just and then I did a lot of traveling. That was my first thing, is I just dove all in. But now I'm sort of moving into sort of now having a kid and having a home and all these things, moving to a place where I'm trying to do more creative consultancy work. And I do sell presets now, and I try to get more into the editing space of things. And so I still work for companies, and lots of opportunities still come up, but now I'm able to sort of weigh it a bit more. And so I'm trying to be pretty narrow about the kinds of work that I say yes to, because what I want to do is ultimately drive all of my work into like environmental care. And a dream thing for me would be to ultimately end up like providing some sort of photography creativity for the Department of the Interior, the people who oversee all of the national parks. Like that for me would be so huge, because I think especially in a time like right now, we need creative people to use their creative skills, both in how they make stuff with their hands, but also in how they think, to impact these places that we all find so beautiful. But I'm like, we need to think about it on a next level where like, okay, but now how can we be creative in how we take care of it? Not just in how we show it pictures about it on Instagram, but we're creative people. So let's use our creative minds to think, okay, we need to preserve this. So that's my kind of next, I think, my trajectory. And so that involves me doing less sort of partnering with clothing companies and partnering with all of these other things. Because for me, I mean, if it pays the bills, I will do it because you have to. And then other than that, I'm like, I just want something that's going to kind of move me forward in that direction. And so I say yes to lower paying things that are over in that realm, just because that's worth it for me to sort of get me turned and moving in that direction. If that makes any sense. I mean, I just said a lot of words, so.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think it's, what I found, I feel like in the last 5 years, especially because of the internet and because of Instagram and just, just the quality of photography, I feel like that's out there is, one, even for me, I was a Boy Scout, it was like one project short of Eagle, all that stuff. Yeah. And so like, I felt like I cared about the environment. It was definitely a leave no trace kind of guy. I go camping and all that stuff. Being on the East Coast, I really care about the ocean and water and all that stuff, and overfishing. But, I think we, just as people, or maybe it's Americans or whatever, we just care about things that like are pretty and valuable. And so like 20 years ago, if you asked like the average American, like, hey, name a natural, American thing that we should care about, and people will be like the Grand Canyon, be like, all right, cool, like that's what it is. Because I feel like now, one, people, I think some people just didn't even know that there were like 100 or more national parks. And then, people will want to see both in a tourism vibe and in the natural, like, we're prone to visual beauty. One, obviously, like, I love your work because of that. And that's why people go to Iceland or
Sure.
wherever. But even in the States, like, we can take care of and we could steward like what we have. And photography and inspiration is like the carrot version of that rather than the
Mhm.
stick. Like I think there's one side of it that's like, hey, look at all this trash and this ugly stuff, and that's super important. But I'm always like, I love the inspirational side where it's like, hey, let's just take people hiking for the first
Mhm.
time, on this, even if it's just easy on this trail. Like, look how pretty this
Yeah.
is. Or like, people love to learn. People love subculture the same way that people, I know in DC, like you'll go to a cooking class and they'll be like, this filet mignon was from an aged steer,
Yeah.
blah blah
Right.
blah blah blah. That you can be like, hey, like these leaves help, you know, offset the carbon footprint. So if we plant more trees like this and we steward more trees like this, and you're just like mind blown, you're like, what in the world? And as photographers, like we can share those stories for the things that matter. So I think that's really cool. I love that. Everything you said though gave me a bunch of questions. What did you go to school for music wise? Did you play guitar or something else?
I love that you said, "Did you play guitar or something else?" Because so many people play guitar. That's hilarious. And I did play guitar.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I went to
yeah,
school for too. So I was like,
yeah,
oh, I'm just guessing. We have a lot in
yeah.
common already.
I went to school and I had a lot more vocal credits, and so by the time I
Mm,
transferred to complete my degree, it would have taken me 2 years to do it as a vocal emphasis versus a guitar emphasis. And so I was just like, let's just get this done. And so it chose to,
yeah.
I was still in a like guitar ensemble. I still played guitar for all kinds of uh, projects and things like that. And I still enjoy it. But yeah, so technically I have a degree in music, composition, vocal performance, and so that anyway, that's what I went for. But yeah, I did play the guitar.
That's so cool, man. I love that. It's people don't understand music school is like really weird where it's like most of the time you have to take a minor in something else, and maybe guitar was your minor, or
Right.
like for me, like we had to take piano, all this
Yeah.
stuff. And but that's really cool. I love that. I want to talk. I didn't know, so you did a good job wiping it from the internet because I try to do my research. Like, and I've been following you for I feel like a decent amount, so maybe I saw some of that overlap. But wedding photography for 8 years, I think that's you said something that I wonder if it's similar to like professional sports where, I'm in the zone right now as a wedding photographer. That's like my main thing. And then I do some commercial stuff on the side. And I'm feeling two things. One, the commercial stuff is getting bigger and growing, exponentially, which is really cool and really fun. Like I'm in Toronto right now for a gig we talked about before. And that's really cool as a photographer that I'm like, oh, one, the budget is good, like, and it takes time to get those. So you're like, oh, this is something that I could do alternatively to this other
Mhm.
thing. And I didn't, I don't even have any commercial work on my site. Like it like slowly grew over time to become like, a few different brands guy, right? Like similar to you, like, hey, you have to call Ryan, you have to call Adam. But at the same time, I wonder if it's like professional sports where wedding photography, on the best of cases, maybe let's pretend all the good things about it. Where guys like us want to give the energy to people on a thing that's valuable and a day that's valuable. But I wonder if there is like a cutoff of time, and that's okay. Like we don't expect Michael Jordan to play like he did, at
Right.
25, and that's okay. And we're just like, oh yeah, that guy was one of the good ones. That was really cool. And now he does other
Sure.
things. And I wonder if there is like a shelf life for a wedding photographer. I heard one guy we had on the podcast before, and he was like, I think I will know when I want to get out when my jokes don't land anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm like there. I think yes, there is a shelf life for everyone personally. Like I think everybody has a
Mm,
point, but I'm like you see people like Jose Villa, right? Like
yeah,
a person who I'm like that dude doesn't look like he has a shelf life. Like that dude looks like he's just gonna do that forever because he's landed such a well respected niche that it looks like he's so comfortable in. And I think everybody sort of looks comfortable in their area because that's part of our job is to like not look uncomfortable when we're being
yeah.
paid to do this. But I think that it's just weird because I don't think there's enough talk amongst creatives, particularly about the reality that booking 50 weddings a year for one person might be really successful, but on another hand, that might be costing them way more than is worth it, or that might not be success. That might be success on paper, but like, what if at the end of it they're depressed, they're a nervous wreck? What if at the end of it, they're like, the cost to them personally means that once photography has run its course, they're just too tired to like know what they're all about as a person. Like there's all kinds of ways that that could cost us rather than just in our pocketbooks. Like that's, I think that there's just more to be said about like, there's other ways to be successful than to, as a travel photographer like I am, than to just be traveling all the time. And it's weird because it's like we have one version of success pushed at us, I think, via, I don't know, it feels too cliche to blame social media for me at this point, but I'm like, it's harder to see the ways in which success needs to come in all of its holistic forms of like, okay, I realized, because I had a chance to meet Chris Burkhardt, who I think is he's pioneered a lot of successful avenues via social media and outdoor photography. But I remember pausing after I met him, and I was able to sort of see some of his work ethic. And I was like, oh, for me, even if I reached that point, that wouldn't be success to me, because I'm not able to maintain that. Like how often he's out of his house and things like that. Like he's found a way to make that work. For me, that wouldn't be success. Even if I reached what I think people would say, like, oh, you've made it. I'm like, oh, yeah, that might not be making it for everybody. That's for him. Like that's, and so to your point about a shelf life kind of thing, I'm like, even if you're booking more than you've ever booked, if for you you're starting to feel disconnected from your work, if you're starting to feel like there's internal kind of attrition of like, wow, this is starting to cost me in some other weird kind of way that I can't really explain yet, but I don't feel whole anymore. Like this is starting to be like every other job, right? And there are elements to what we do where I'm like, yeah, it's work, and so you're gonna have times where it's not all fun stuff. And so I think that it's just everybody having to become honest with the fact that that's happening internally. And so I think that I mean, this also isn't something that's talked about too often in the creative world, but like paying attention to like your emotional and mental health of like, how are you doing with all that? And then also starting to platform success stories of people that are not just successful in one avenue of like, yeah, I booked 52 weddings this year. I'm like, okay, well, what did that do for your internal life? Because I know people that book weddings like crazy, and they're depressed because they hate their work, they hate themselves. I'm just like, man. So it's like, okay, well then it's not like, let's look at the whole picture. Like, I think, I mean, it doesn't take that much work to see a person who's financially really successful, and we have enough stories of celebrities that have mental breakdowns and I'm like, yeah, they're rich and it looks like they would have this cush life, but yeah, there's more to it than just the bottom line of all of that. And so I think that having to pay attention to that kind of stuff is huge. And I think that especially in a highly anxious world that I think we live in, it's important for us to start talking about that, because we can also support each other more than just liking each other's pictures on Instagram too. You know what I mean?
No, totally.
So, yeah.
No, I mean, it's perfect sense. And I mean, yeah, everything, there's so much to what you said. I remember before I got married, people would ask my wife, like, and I don't even travel, you know, I feel like this year is like a heavy travel year, but, you know, as a wedding photographer, and I don't even do that much like international stuff. You know, people ask my wife, like, hey, does it concern you that Adam travels so much, or, you know, he's out of town so much? And my wife was very strong at the time and still is. And she was just like, I knew Adam traveled before we started dating, you know, and I got to see like the progression of his business, and I know that Adam cares about me, etc. And that's a personal walk that everybody has to
Sure.
go through, right? And I love what you said too about like Chris Ricard, and he's amazing. And I mean, shout out, we want to get him on the podcast. We've tried twice. We want really, he's
Yeah.
awesome. But I think too is I've talked about this with other people, and I think what we show to other people as even success for us, so they might look at Ryan and say, oh, well, he's got 100,000 followers on Instagram. That's so cool.
Mhm.
Like, well, he's got a K and, or blue check mark or whatever. But the reality is that, like, there are people everywhere of all different levels who I'm obsessed with this idea of like the middle class entrepreneur, like for actors, musicians, photographers, etc. We're obsessed with like, hey, I need to be a platinum selling recording artist. I need to be in a feature film. But like, I have friends in New York who, they might take a bunch of extra gigs. Like they're just hustling, they're grinding, whatever, and they're making it work. Like they're paying the
Yeah.
bills and they're not in debt. And you know what? Like there's something to be said for that. And I think as photographers, something I talk to a lot of my mentees about is just the idea of balance. Like I have to learn this too, but I'm like, hey, like you have to choose your family every time. Like you can't let your husband or your wife or your spouse get mad at your business. You don't want your business to be the enemy. And so maybe that looks like, instead of 50 weddings, that looks like 25 weddings. Or hey, like I remember, growing up in church and working for a large church, the pastor who like traveled a lot had a rule, and he was like, hey, I only do like one overnight trip a month now, because I want to spend time with my family. And I was like, oh, like that boundary seems super reasonable and super cool. And like, it only takes 12 of those a year, and then everything else has to be like through a boundary or a process. And I mean, obviously none of us know that stuff unless you had like an amazing childhood. When you're 23 or 25 and you start your business, I feel like I've only started using my no muscle, if you will, once I turned 29 or 30. And I was like, oh, one, you feel more comfortable in business. You're like, I don't have to take everything. And then, which is a luxury, right? It's great. And then two, yeah, I love my family, and where can I find the most balance? And for some people, it still works out, right? And you have Chris Ricard, 4 million followers, a studio, all those awesome guys killing it. For some people, it looks like Ryan. Some people, it looks like Adam. Some people, it looks like, Susie, whomever.
Right.
And it's just like, it's not levels as it is like colors in the pie chart or colors of the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's just, but I think we're obsessed with that success. And I think, and because that's just what it looks like to us, we say, oh, Ryan's got a really cool, I saw the post about the garage. Ryan's got a really cool garage. If I could have a garage like him, I would be successful. But it's like, no, man, you could have your own garage, or you could park outside.
Well, it's like, I mean, some of the things that I'm passionate now and that I really want to take care of now, like I bought a house last year. And so doing like my lawn has been one of those things where I'm like, I'm nerding out about it and I love it and I want to make time for it. So that legitimately is like, okay, I need to carve out time that I would otherwise be struggling trying to think of a caption for some Instagram post, and just kind of let that go over here and just be okay with that, because it's like, yeah, that's bringing me life right now. Like participating in these other ways of being in my mid 30s with my family that bring me true life. Like, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think also working for my church for the last few years with healthy people that understand emotional and boundaries and are kind of helping me understand that part of it too has really impacted the way that I pursue creativity too. And so I think that it's just having to infuse the creative space with this understanding of like, just because that person has the most followers, or that person has a studio, or that person has the most on paper success, maybe for you that would be failure. Like maybe if you reached that point, the amount of things you would have to give up to get to that point, maybe that for you wouldn't be success. And I think once we start having that conversation, then we sort of broaden success to be a wider spectrum of like what we can consider that to be. And I know I know some photographers right now who are dealing with some really intense personal things, who are taking a break from social media and who aren't working as often to take care of their emotional a life. And I'm like, that's successful. Like that's them taking their life on and doing something meaningful beyond the fact that they're super well respected photographers, which is just one aspect of who we are. And so for me, it's been like, okay, it all has to fit into that. And I think talking about the photography part of it is the easiest part. It's talking about all of those other parts that, I mean, we have to advocate for the fact that we're whole human beings that have a lot of different needs. And so, yeah, but that obviously takes it into a much kind of shoots it into the stratosphere of what we're talking about too. But
nah, that makes sense. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast. Was like, my goal isn't to interview people and just talk about how awesome they are. And obviously, like, everybody who's on I believe is awesome. I'm a fan and I'm curious, but also too is like, we want to talk about real stuff because it sounds cheesy, but yeah, mental health is not one of those things that people talk about. And, we don't showcase that. And there's one element for me is like, that's okay. Like, we don't need to know how the Starbucks vice president is doing at life, to have, the product be good, so there's an element of that. But at the same time, we'd hope that, like, institutionally, hey, Starbucks, if your VP needs time off or whatever, like, he could take it or she could take it or whatever. And it's like important, I think, to podcasts in general. And people are afraid to, like, ask a friend, but they're not afraid to, like, literally listen to a podcast or listen to one person's, like, perspective. And so, I think that's super important. I do want to ask, like, so nowadays you transition to, like, full on travel commercial vibes, how do you get most of your work these days? What does that look like? And, feel free to explain it in a way to a non-photographer. Yeah. Like, do people reach out over Instagram and they're like, hey, like, we have this sunglasses line, we want to shoot it? Like, how does that work for you as a commercial guy?
I would say for the smaller companies, they do just DM me because a lot of times they don't have kind of the name recognition that it gets me to open an email or gets anyone to open an email. It's just like, oh, it's another person trying to sell me another thing. So they'll just send me a DM on Instagram, and that works perfectly fine too. Like, I don't have any problem with that. And then larger companies usually will either ask the lowest person on the totem pole to just kind of like, hey, we need to do this campaign. We need to send an email to these 20 people, see who's even interested, who can. And then I always know that if I'm getting an email from a larger client, most of the time that same email is probably going out to 10 people to see who's available or who can do it for that budget. It's not like, I don't have the illusion that there are people in suits at Nike nerding out over me. So anyways, it'll be them directly reaching out to me. A lot of companies now are also using sort of these influencer sort of ad agency companies, and there's quite a few of them that exist, but it's great. They're these agencies that act as kind of middlemen between companies and creatives, and they try and partner the best creative for that job, or just to sort of not have to get lost in the weeds of email. They'll sort of be the person that make that connection. And so I'm a part of a few of those, which that's been pretty cool, because I'm like, if I didn't have that, some of these opportunities wouldn't, I don't know if I would have ever even thought to work for some of these, like the Garage Smart, for instance, found me through one of those agencies. And I was like, I wouldn't have even known to, like, partner with somebody that makes a really cool garage product. Like, that's something that would have just popped up in my head. But I'm like, oh yeah, that would be cool. I've never even thought about that. And so they act as the person that sort of mitigates that interaction. So it's kind of all over the place. And how companies, I mean, is something that I'm starting to explore a bit more, because I'm not always sure. But I I think just having a presence on participating in the like Adobe stock and just having my name be something that's a part of the conversation in multiple areas and really trying to work towards being respectable towards that and giving everybody I interact with, like, I want them to have a positive experience so that my name is a part of the conversation, even if my work isn't heads and shoulders above everyone else's. Like, I see so many really amazing photographers all the time, or I see beautiful pictures all the time, and I think there's no shortage of that. But my goal is to just give people a positive experience, and so I think just trying to do that in all of these angles and atmospheres makes it so that I get sort of reached out to in that way. And I don't really know how much these people's like art departments are talking to each other, but I'm sure that if a person's trying to put together a campaign, they might reach out to somebody they've worked with in the past that has priced out, and they're like, hey, we're trying to put someone's together. Is there anybody whose work you like? And so genuinely it is. Sorry, those birds go crazy right now, so I don't know if you can hear them, but like,
It's all good
over here. But anyway, so yeah, it's sort of all over the place how these places find me, but I think that it's just a result of trying to have a positive quality interaction with them wherever it takes place. So I try to respond to every email as quickly as I can. I respond to Instagram DMs just because I know that everybody's out here trying to hustle the same as I am. So yeah.
No, totally. That's I think it's interesting. Like, I have two questions, but the first one, I feel like there are these like influencer agencies, and some I feel like, I don't have a K, I don't have a check mark or anything like that. Some of them, I can't think of their names right now. So there's some where you still get that email and they're just like, hey, you want to be a part of this like influencer network, or it'll be like a pet store thinks that you'd be a great fit. And I've never said yes. Like, I don't even know. It always feels like spammy to me. But is there a even a name of one of the networks, if you don't mind talking about it, like, and then how does that actually work? Do you sign a contract with that agency? Do they get a cut? What does it look like photo wise? Do they get to keep any rights or anything like that?
So the way that it's played out for me with, there's a couple, there's the H Hub, there's Aspire IQ, there's a couple of these places where what they'll do is they pretty much have a list of campaigns that I can look through, or they will reach out to me and say, yeah, we think you'd be a great fit. And then I can return it back and see, okay, do they have a fixed budget? If they do, and it's lower than I would consider, then okay, I just say no and move on, because there's also a bunch of other photographers on there who are just trying to build their portfolio, and it's perfect for them to be able to just get work with name brand companies that they just need to have on their resume. And so what will happen is, if a budget, the time frame, the product is something that I can work with, that I can integrate genuinely into my work, that then how every company does it is a bit a different. Some of them work through emails. Some of them have a built-in chat platform where you can then talk to the person who's hiring from this company, and then you can negotiate sort of like some places say, we will offer you this product for X amount of dollars, and I'll say, okay, I'd love to work with you, but I'd actually like X product plus X product, and I can do it for this amount. And so it's still, I'm like, all of these companies that work with these influencer ad agency places, they understand contract negotiation. And so it's like I just think it's taken me some time to understand, like there are some places that want to have that conversation and that are comfortable with it, and there's some that are there specifically because they don't want to have that conversation. They want somebody else to take care of, like, just send us the name of the photographer who's going to shoot this product for us for the line that we put out in 2 weeks. That's all we want to know is what's happening. And so so I think it ranges. Like, it's not any one kind of experience, and everybody does it a bit differently, but it's all also trying to give these companies your engagement ratings, so they know how many followers you have. You'll have a profile there with some of your pictures on it, and it'll keep up to date with kind of like, they get X amount of likes per post and X amount of comments per post. And so companies are also able to see, like, okay, not only is this person's pictures great, but they have a really respectable engagement. And so that will boost how much you can, like, ask for that kind of stuff.
No, that makes sense. Is that, at least in the influencer space, is it a balance of, one, Ryan is a good photographer, might be a good fit for our visual brand, but then also, hey, we need somebody with a big billboard, or a big megaphone, and maybe is it kind of like a weird dance where, if somebody had double the engagement, but they weren't as good a photographer, does that just depend on the brand? How does that work? Or, are you able to kind of say, like, hey, I've been doing this for a long time, or hey, like, whether it's an outdoor promotion or sunglasses or apparel, like, how do you kind of navigate that space? And, or, I'm just curious, kind of like, how do you sell yourself? Because I feel like a lot of photographers suck at, bragging about ourselves. It feels weird,
Sure.
And maybe you don't have to because they're already reaching out. Like, what does that
Yeah,
like?
well, I think that it's it is kind of a dance where, unfortunately, I think the world that we're in right now, the creative world that we're in right now, it's like, for them, it's like, okay, what's their billboard size is one of the first things that gets their attention. So a person that's got 400,000 followers, just inherently from having that number, is going to get more attention, whether they got that amount genuinely or, like, whether they paid for it. These companies don't care. They just see, like, they see that a number. They don't have time to do the homework on everyone that they're trying to hire. Like, that's trying to, like, look at, okay, well, can we look at back in their history to see if they bought 200,000 followers at some point? They don't have time for that. And so that's one of the things that they'll see is an opportunity for 400,000 potential people to see this product. And then after that, I think some people are starting to become a little more privy to that being a reality in the space. I mean, there's a couple articles that I participated with that was talking about that exact thing happening, where people were buying followers, buying comments, boosting their numbers, then charging companies based on those inflated numbers. And and when you're in that kind of world, the genuine engagement that you're left with, that you can only say, okay, like, what's actually happening here is how many people actually click through to buy the product that they're trying to sell. And so companies are starting to move towards that, which I think is great, because that's going to weed out all of this person has 800,000 followers but gets 500 likes on every picture. It's like, not that likes are the end all be all, but I'm just saying that there are people who have inflated numbers because they've tried to achieve this system, and it's worked for a long time. And I think the only way that companies are starting to see, the only way to combat that is to say, like, no, what's the click through? Like, what is this person actually bringing to our company? Not just how popular is this picture on Instagram, because you can fake all of that. You can manufacture all of that. And so
Totally.
So yeah, it's I think I'm answering your question, and also I just got real spacey.
No,
Okay.
it's good. I think it's yeah, I feel like there is yeah, people nowadays, and I'm only starting to dip into this commercial world, and definitely not from the influencer side of things, but even for like podcast advertising, like we're trying to pursue that and seeing what would be a good fit for us. And the idea of kind of what you were talking about is the old school way is like the CPM, right? And so it's how many
Yep.
impressions will we get, all that stuff, and you could charge a lot for that, right? So like how many cars pass this billboard, to use that analogy
Sure.
still, and companies pay more, right? So you're like, yeah, this Coke ad will see 100,000 people a day, so you're like, oh man, we charge a lot for this space. But yeah, people who really, I feel like, have a huge influence, and companies are seeing this too, is like, what's the bread and butter of how many people will actually come to our site and look at this thing? Or, we hear podcast ads or YouTube ads all the time for like Dollar Shave Club, right? So it's like, hey, if you can bring us 10 people a month or 10 people per episode, we'll give you $5,000 or we'll give you $1,000 or whatever. And that seems like much more. And I've read things on both, because there's the other side of it where some brands might be like, how much is just awareness worth, and that's like a good thing as well, but none of that's going to work if you have fake followers, or fake comments and all. I didn't even know you could buy comments. I just knew you could buy
Yeah.
followers.
Well, it's like, so how I think about it is like the amount of money that a company pays for an ad at this Super Bowl, right? It's out of control, right? But
Yeah,
at the same time, when you think about it, it's like, yeah, but like they're just paying to kind of play on this major platform when people might be tuning out, might mute the commercials, might not care, or like however, maybe this Super Bowl isn't a great example because that's like historically a place where people pay attention to the commercials. But think about maybe
sure.
like a game. I'm trying to think of some show that's like huge that had a finale anyway with commercials in it. If you paid to be a part of that, you're not necessarily paying for people to pay super close attention. You're just paying for people to hear your name in their ears once, and then for them, that's all that they need, is to be a part of the conversation. That's all that they want, is for
Yeah,
people to have heard it. And so I think that that's a great, like, I can see the value in that, but I think particularly within the Instagram space where it's been so flooded, to now it's almost like, and it feels cliche to say I'm an Instagram influencer. It's like, yeah, everybody can call themselves an influencer. Like, that word doesn't mean anything.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but I'm like, okay, how much are you actually influencing? Like, an influencer isn't just somebody that posts on behalf of a company. An influencer is somebody that can do something creatively in a way that actually drives people towards a product that can be useful to a company in that way. And so that's why I've tried to be as narrow as I can going forward. If you look back on my Instagram, back to when it was just square pictures, like, I was working with everybody that wanted to like reach out to me, just because I was like, I didn't know any better and I didn't really have any clout to say no. And so now
Yeah,
it's like, I'm trying to make sure that when people see what I post, reminding them I only post things that I actually like, that I actually believe in, that I actually think are good, which means I have to maintain this integrity that says, if you see it on my feed, you can trust that I've tried it. I actually think that it's great. And it's not just that this company paid me. It's that I maybe said no to 20 other things that I'm like, I don't really know what this is. I've never tried it. I don't know anything about it. In order to be an influencer, so that I can influence people saying like, no, these are things that I've actually tried that I actually think are pretty cool. If you want to try them because of my review about them, then cool. And so that's a way that I bring quality to a company. Whereas I think that just the days of people with huge Instagram followings and things just getting all the work, I think that's going to fall away, because people are starting to see the return on an investment for that being something that's not great. So, yeah.
no, that makes sense, man. I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up, and I love this statement, and obviously, like, it's the biggest thing that I see in your at least your public work, right? Which is like we would say is like outdoor landscape vibes, and but it's like intense. It's cotton candy landscape. It's very pretty. Um, I loved this phrase. I think it was on your site, and it's like we need to exercise the muscle of recognizing and calling out the beauty in the
Mm.
world. And obviously, that might just be like website copy, but I want to know like how do you still do that? I'm always interested in like how do people stay creative or
Mm.
inspired, or like what does that mean for you, and how can we do that? You know, like as a last question of the show is like how do people recognize and exercise that muscle of calling out the
Cool.
beauty?
Well, I I appreciate you asking about that because that took me that's something that I developed over the course of like years trying to find out like what is my ethos. And so I really did
Yeah,
work
yeah,
on the kind of like what's driving me, and I think part of it too is so for me it's so easy, especially now I think, to be cynical, to be critical, to be negative. Like that's the easy way out because there's just that's what's pumped at us because that's what gets the click through is people seeing all of the hatred and all that. And so for me, I just think it's so important that as especially as creatives that we have an incentive to, or I think we have a responsibility to remind people like, oh, there's beauty out there. And so the way that I think people should do it, one is just to be out there and see it, kind of like what you were saying. The inspiring part of taking care of our planet is not the hammering people with these the statistics of how we're destroying it, but like inviting people out to a hike and just like taking your time, just slowly just saying like, look how beautiful this is. And once that gets into a person, it inevitably will challenge them to be like, okay, how do we take care of this thing that I just had a beautiful experience with? And so there's a there's a practice, particularly within cleaning. I don't remember where I heard this, but this is it works because I do it. But you go into a room that's dirty and you close your eyes and you imagine what it's like clean, and then you let yourself feel the experience of like what that's like when it's all perfect and when it's great, and then you open
mm,
your eyes and you're actually driven by the positive experiences pulling you towards that end goal rather than being pushed by negativity. And so for me, I'm like,
mm-hmm,
that's what we just need to do as creatives, as people, is imagine how beautiful things can be. And I think once you have those experiences of seeing the beauty in other people, the beauty in our planet, being out there, then you're driven towards the goal of taking care of it and leaving no trace. And as a photographer, like not crossing over that boundary to walk on these plants to take that picture because you've had an experience of wanting to take care of that because of how beautiful it is. And so all of this sudden you're doing more than just being a photographer, you're being just a quality human being. And and so I think when we can do that, we can have those experiences more regularly. It is like a muscle where all of this is said, and you're able to recast narratives in your head about like maybe this person isn't all awful. Maybe the world isn't just all falling apart. And then when you start to think of things as beautiful, you start to see it more often and paying attention to it in very small places. And I think at like strictly from a photography point of view, there are people that see those really tiny details in wedding photography and all these things, and they're able to see things that other people don't see, right? Like they're just able to see that older couple holding hands over there. They're just tuned into all of these areas where beauty exists in a way that other people aren't. And I think that that just takes a lot of work. I mean, specifically photography, that takes practice of having done it multiple times. But when you train yourself to do that for other humans, when you train yourself to do that for the planet, for whatever sphere of photography you're in, when we practice that ability of being present in beautiful spaces and opening our imagination to where is the beauty that exists around me right now. When we do that, I think we become better creatives. I think we become better communicators, and I don't think there's a shortcut other than just like asking yourself the hard questions of what are the ways that this could possibly be more beautiful than I'm imagining. So, yeah.
I love that, man. I love that. When I saw that, I was like, that is awesome. And I think, too, what you were just saying, and this is the less beautiful words version of what you said, is like, you love cutting grass, right? But you're not motivated by, oh, I need to cut the grass. You're motivated by how the grass looks after you've cut it or after you've maintained it.
Absolutely.
Or like, you work out because of the feeling after or the result after.
Totally.
Rather than like the journey to get there, so that makes sense. And it's a hard thing, and it's other people are better at certain things than others. Some people are really good about going to the gym and they make that a muscle. And we had another photographer on here named Jacob Loafman, and he's just one of those photographers. Yeah, he's awesome. He's just like one of those guys that like he helps people get weird. And he's like, the goal isn't necessarily to get weird, but by exercising that muscle, you'll be able to think differently. And like you gotta do that to keep things fresh, man. So I appreciate you so much coming on, and it's such a nice surprise to get that email that it was like, hey, Ryan's coming on. I was like, yes, mother trucker. But dude, so where can people go to find you? We're gonna link everything in the show notes, but I know you've got presets, your how can people help? And obviously, can they say hi on Instagram? What's the best way to say
I mean, everything, my entire I own Ryan Longnecker on the internet, so there's not a lot of competition. So at Ryan Longnecker on Instagram, that's probably a best place to come say hi. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for trying to help people just kind of problem solve their creative goals. For some people, that might be a preset. For other people, it's just asking me a question, and I'm always willing to help out. So feel free to reach out and ask me anything that you want to know, and I'd be happy to help if I can.
Oh yeah, it feels so insane to be back, and Ryan's one of those people where I feel so lucky to have had him on this podcast. He's one of those people. He's one of my heroes. Like, he's one of the guys that I've just been following since I first got Instagram, really. Like we talked about in the episode, but before Instagram let you had non-square photos on there. It might have even been before they let you upload your own stuff. Like, it was in the Insta days. And obviously, as you can tell from the episode, his work matches his heart, man. It's just a super good guy. So I'm always feeling good when we have somebody like that on. I would encourage you, go on Instagram, tell him you love the episode, tell him what you thought. He's the man. He's so approachable and just super kind. I'm so glad we could land him and make it happen via email. We've reached out, and he was so kind the second time to make it happen, and we're so appreciative of that. Even when we're on the road, we're making it happen. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. It would be an honor. It is a challenge to run a fun podcast and to keep it going. Leave a review on iTunes. It really means a lot. Tag us in it. Take a screenshot. We want to know what you think, and I have been loving the DMs lately on the Bearded Talk Instagram, just saying, hey, telling us what you think, your favorite episodes. It seems like things are going really well for people, and you guys are having a good season, if summer is your season. So thank you guys so much for listening. Hit up Ryan Longnecker and tell him you said hey. Have a wonderful day, guys. Keep being awesome.